Everyone knew that billionaire Alexander Hawthorne had a girl he treasured above all else. The girl was doted on and spoiled, like a heroine from a novel, pampered by everyone, except for me. On my wedding day, the girl, dressed in a white wedding gown, looked at me with open provocation. The one who isn't loved is the real homewrecker. So, what if you marry Alexander Hawthorne? I'm still the woman who holds his heart. At her words, the corners of my lips curled up. I turned and slapped Alexander square across the face. Are you a corpse? The other woman is right here at our doorstep. And you're playing deaf and dumb. On my wedding day, Ava Hawthorne, dressed in a white wedding gown, stood before me in front of everyone and looked at me with open provocation. The one who isn't loved is the real homewrecker. So, what if you marry Alexander Hawthorne? I'm still the woman who holds his heart. The ceremony hadn't started yet, but the backstage area was crowded with people, including many influential figures from the city's most prominent families. They all exchanged glances, but no one dared to intervene. There was a simple reason for this. Everyone knew that the city's top magnate, Alexander Hawthorne, had a girl he treasured above all else. The girl was doted on and spoiled, like a heroine from a novel, pampered by the entire Hawthorne family. Even though I was now Alexander's wife, I was merely a decoration in a business marriage, in no way comparable to the love of his life. The backstage area fell silent, surrounded by his entourage. Alexander walked over, his expression cold. Only when he saw Ava did his eyes seem to thaw like a spring river, becoming incredibly gentle. When he turned back to me, his face was once again a mask of frost. What are you doing just standing there? The wedding is about to start. I let out a cold laugh and looked up at Ava. Do you dare repeat what you just said? Ava sneered and loudly repeated her words, verbatim. Before she could finish, I swung my arm in a wide arc and slapped her across the face. Crack. I work out regularly and have strong arms. With that one slap, Ava's small face immediately turned purple. A drop of blood trickled from her nose, ruining her innocent Namacup makeup look and adding a touch of dark comedy to the scene. Ava, seemingly in shock, clutched her face and stared at me, stunned. I sneered, and then delivered two more resounding slaps, one with my left hand, one with my right. The woman who holds Alexander's heart. Hilarious. I was slapping the woman who holds Alexander's heart. As I raised my hand again, Alexander finally reacted, grabbing my wrist. Isabel Reed, have you caused enough trouble? Ava is just a child. Are you really going to hit her over a few childish words? She's a child, and you're having an affair with her. You pervert. After he finished, I sneered and turned to face him. Alexander frowned at me. The next second, my other hand flew up and delivered another vicious slap to Alexander's face. I looked at his rapidly swelling cheek and sneered. You probably don't know this, but they call me the slap goddess for a reason. With that, I shoved Alexander away and pointed a finger at his nose, letting loose a torrent of abuse. I spent $1.5 billion to marry into your family for business, and you're serving me this kept woman drama. You disgusting old man. If you want to sleep with a young girl, just say so. Don't try to wrap it up in some Pygmalion fantasy for my benefit. It's absolutely sickening. I then threw my bouquet in his face. If this mess isn't cleaned up today, no one is letting this wedding proceed. You think I'm desperate to marry you? The line of men waiting to court me stretches from here to Paris. Who are you to be so picky? If your old man hadn't come begging me, nearly kneeling, do you think you'd even have the chance to marry me? To hell with you. With a final flourish, I tore the white veil from my head and strode out of the backstage area. My mother was waiting in the dressing room. When she saw me, she smiled and gave me a thumbs up. That's my daughter. A true powerhouse. I let out a cold laugh, plopped down on the sofa, and crossed my legs. I've been in the business world for years. I'm no fool. The Hawthorns letting Ava humiliate me in public was nothing more than a compliance test. Their family was a prestigious and powerful clan in the city. However, in recent years, they had failed to keep up with the times. The Hawthorne Group was in decline, its revenues weakening. To secure funding, they had to resort to a marriage of convenience. And I, a woman with money but no established background, was the perfect choice. They coveted my dowry of over $1 billion, but couldn't bring themselves to stoop so low as to ask for it. So, they decided to play the hypocrite, attempting to manipulate me. They wanted to use their noble status to suppress me, to make this nouveau riche woman feel inferior, and eventually offer up her dowry on a silver platter, begging them to use it. Thinking of this, I laughed out loud. Hilarious. Their audacity was off the charts. Their plan was well laid, but they didn't expect that I wasn't some soft persimmon they could mold at will. I was a firecracker. I was raised by my mother, who caught the fast train of economic reform in its early days. She started with a steel factory, partnering with a few others, and later invested in the internet, building a fortune from scratch. I followed in her footsteps, making a name for myself abroad at a young age. Many well-known fashion brands on the market today are subsidiaries of my company. Business is like a battlefield. Those who can survive in it are not to be underestimated. Both my mother and I are first-rate arguers. If it weren't for the chance to expand into the vast domestic market, I would never have agreed to marry Alexander. I looked down on him from the bottom of my heart. My mother's assistant was undercover at the scene. She said the Hawthorne matriarch had arrived, and things were at a stalemate. So we should just wait in the dressing room. There were snacks and sunflower seeds in the room. My mother and I sat on the sofa, cracking seeds and cursing Alexander. In this society, if a woman shows even a hint of weakness, she will be devoured by men. Having fought in the business world for years, my mother and I knew this well. Thus, we both had fiery tempers and could raise our voices when necessary. We knew the Hawthorns had people eavesdropping outside the dressing room, so we made sure to yell as loudly as possible. My mother, having come from humble beginnings, was a master of the art. Her insults were creative, comprehensive, and colorful, digging up the Hawthorne ancestors from their graves. I fanned the flames from the side. We kept it up for half an hour before we heard someone outside, unable to bear it any longer, smash something and storm off. My mother leisurely took a sip of tea and said sarcastically, "I didn't think they'd crack so soon. If they couldn't take it, they shouldn't have brought that little tramp to the wedding. They were just asking for it." I smiled and twirled the ring on my finger. They're just masochists. I heard the entire Hawthorne family is like that. The more you yell at them, the more obedient they become. My mother nodded in solemn agreement. Another half an hour passed, and still, no one came. I knew the Hawthorns couldn't bring themselves to lose face. They were unwilling to abandon their noble heirs to beg a nouveau riche woman of lower status. A notification sound pinged. I picked up my phone. It was a message from the Hawthorne matriarch, asking me to forgive Alexander for her sake and come to the wedding. I immediately sneered. Your sake is worth less than dog crap. You want come and apologize to me? Fine. Well, play hardball. I glanced at the time and decisively called Alexander. The call was answered, and from the sound of it, he had me on speaker. Before Alexander could say a word, I started. "Alexander, I'm giving you 5 minutes. You worthless bastard. You bring that little tramp you're keeping and come apologize to me in person. If you don't, I recall you recently hired a top financial expert to manage your assets. Don't forget, my home base is abroad. My fund management industry is more than respectable. From this moment on, if you dare to be late, it'll be on the other side of every one of your trades tonight. You short, it'll go long. You go long, it'll short. I have plenty of money. I'm not afraid to lose. For every minute you're late, it'll make you lose 10 million. I keep my promises." With that, I ignored the shouts from the other end and hung up. 3 minutes later, hurried footsteps echoed outside the dressing room. The door was thrown open. It was Alexander and Ava. I sat on the sofa with my legs crossed, watching as Alexander reluctantly approached. Only when he bowed his head in submission did I look at Ava. The girl's face was a mess of red and purple, like a dye factory. I put on a fake smile. "Ava, I know you're just a child. I can understand if you don't watch your mouth. It's all right. Once I'm part of the Hawthorne family, it'll teach you slowly." I then took a stack of cash from my handbag. "You're the child Alexander is raising, so that naturally makes me your stepmother. Call me mother, and mother will give you a little reward." Ava's head snapped up. Her face tear-streaked as she looked at Alexander. I smiled sweetly at her. After a long moment, Ava gritted her teeth. Her eyes filled with hatred. But she had no choice but to lower her head. "Mother," I smiled, and with a flick of my wrist, I tossed the stack of cash at her face. "Good girl." Mother's favorite kind of girl is one who has self-respect. Learn from me in the future. Don't let your head be filled with nothing but men. That's being relationship obsessed. It's a sickness, and it needs to be cured. With that, I gracefully stood up, patted the non-existent dust off my clothes, and turned to Alexander with a smile. What are you waiting for, Alexander? Let's go. The wedding concluded perfectly, and I, Isabel Reed, became an instant legend in the city's upper echelons, slapping my adopted daughter and husband at the wedding. And at a high society one at that. What a feat. Everyone said I was a force to be reckoned with. My in-laws had tried to put me in my place in front of everyone, but I had turned the tables, forcing them to eat their own filth. I didn't care what the outside world said. I only knew that I was now the young mistress of the Hawthorne family. On our wedding night, Alexander came to the bedroom, his face as black as the bottom of a pot. Isabel Reed, let me tell you, you may have my body now, but you will never have my heart. I sneered and kicked him off the bed. Who wants your pasty? Pig-like body. One look at it makes someone like me, who can't stand pork, feel sick. Get out. The next day, I woke up refreshed and energized. The first thing I did was call all the servants of the mansion together. The butler stood in the middle, his hands clasped before him. I looked him up and down and suddenly smiled. Who pays your salary now? The butler replied respectfully. You do, ma'am. I nodded. He seemed to catch on quickly. After he finished, I picked up my teacup and skimmed the foam off the top. Since you know who puts food on your table, don't be disloyal. Be careful, or I'll fire you all. We'll see if those old relics will still have you then. I looked up. A few of the younger servants flinched, bowing their heads even lower. When the servants had dispersed, I looked up. Alexander was standing on the second-floor landing, frowning at me. I placed the teacup on the table and said slowly, if you have something to say, come down here. I hate looking up at people. At my words, Alexander descended the stairs, 2 dark circles under his eyes. The young master had never slept on the floor before. No matter. He'd get used to it. Alexander's voice was hard. Isabel Reed, why do you have to be so ruthless? I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean, ruthless? This is called an employee briefing. If they listen to me and do their jobs, I certainly won't be stingy. Rewards and punishments must be clear. That's basic business logic. You've been the head of the Hawthorne family for so long. Haven't you learned that yet? Seeing my mocking expression, Alexander took a deep breath and changed the subject. That $1.5 billion. When will you give it to me? I was amused and retorted. My dowry. Why should I give it to you? Did you pay a bride price for me? Why are you asking for my dowry? What do you need it for? Faced with my 3-part question, Alexander clenched his fists and said in a low voice, the Hawthorne family is in some trouble lately. We're short on funds and need your dowry for investment. As for the bride price, we were in the wrong. I burst out laughing. A vague we were in the wrong was supposed to get him $1.5 billion. In his dreams. I leaned back on the sofa, crossing my legs, and smiled. You want my dowry? Fine. But every penny you invest, every bit of capital injected into the Hawthorne family, has to go through my people. Every business move you make has to be reviewed by my assistant beforehand. Hearing this, Alexander's long-suppressed anger finally erupted. Isabel Reed, don't push it too far. I've never met such a shrewish woman. Seeing him flare up, I slammed my teacup on the floor. Crash. I stared at him. Alexander, you're quite the hypocrite, aren't you? When the Hawthorne family didn't give a damn about me, didn't let me use any of your resources or connections, you didn't say a peep. Now that it's my turn, I'm a shrew. Let me tell you, this is a business marriage. If you want to cooperate, to exchange resources and have mutual benefits, I have no problem with that. But if you think you can get a free ride off of me, I do like to see how many lives you have to spare for such foolishness. I stood up and looked down at him. I know you like gentle women, but your like is worth as much to me as a pile of dog crap. Think about your own business value. Show me some sincerity, and then come back to talk about cooperation. With that, I left Alexander standing there, took the handbag the butler handed me, and walked out the door. I was no pampered high society wife. I had my own career and no time to be a vase in the Hawthorne household. I had been working hard on the Reed Company's branch in the city. The marriage to the Hawthornes was originally to expand my network. Now that my goal was achieved, I was naturally busy developing my business. After my morning lecture to Alexander, my work in the city proceeded much more smoothly. Seeing the Hawthorns' sincerity, I wasn't stingy either. I invested a large sum into their company. After all, I was now a shareholder in Hawthorn Group. Our fortunes were tied, but the investment came with conditions. To prevent the Hawthorns from squandering my money, I sent Alexander a contract. If Hawthorn Group failed to meet the profit targets I set within 3 months, my subsequent investments would not follow. My assistant told me that Alexander threw a huge tantrum in his office after receiving the contract. But what did that matter? He eventually agreed to my terms. When my assistant, Mia, brought me the contract, she looked worried. Ms. Reed, are we being a bit too aggressive, pushing them like this? I flicked the contract with satisfaction and smiled. Mia, you're still young. You don't know that when dealing with the Hawthorns, you have to be this ruthless. They look down on me, my background, and my gender. In today's society, the demands on women are too harsh. Women must be gentle, must be subservient. As soon as they exhibit masculine traits, people immediately label them unruly or unmarriageable. My current actions were just normal business practices. Yet Alexander found me aggressive and not a good woman. To hell with good women. Under my high-pressure policy, the great ship of Hawthorn Group finally began to move. Terrified I would pull my investment, Alexander worked himself to the bone, innovating within the company. There were high-level personnel changes, and internal turmoil brewed. Every night, Alexander came home late. Only when the construction of my city branch was complete did I remember I had a stepdaughter named Ava. The butler informed me that her birthday was approaching. As was customary, Alexander would throw a lavish party at the mansion. I followed tradition and even spent a little extra on a set of jewelry for her. Seeing Ava's feigned aloofness, her eyes betraying her delight, a small smile played on my lips. Let her be smug. She wouldn't be in the Hawthorn house for much longer anyway. At the party, I wore a deep red, form-fitting dress, and around my neck was a ruby necklace my mother had just acquired at an auction. The main stone was as red as blood, looking both dangerous and beautiful. In contrast, Ava wore a pale pink cheapao, her long hair curled and cascading over her chest. She looked artfully disheveled and pitifully innocent. Alexander looked at Ava with tenderness, but his brow furrowed when his eyes turned to me. I paid him no mind, reapplying my lipstick in the mirror. At the party, I entered with my arm linked through Alexander's. The crowd exchanged glances, but no one spoke. I knew they were used to seeing Alexander and Ava together. They were naturally unaccustomed to me, with my flamboyant personality. But they would soon change their minds about me. When the party began, I ditched Alexander and circulated with a glass of wine. The businessmen who had previously looked down on me now all smiled and toasted me. After all, I now carried the title of Mrs. Hawthorn, and they couldn't afford to offend me. I hadn't been idle in the business world all these years. After a few rounds of socializing, even the most arrogant tycoons realized I had some serious skills. They became serious and engaged me in conversation. After a few drinks, I excused myself to the restroom to catch my breath. As I was fixing my hair in the mirror, I suddenly heard the voices of a few young girls. A girl in a pink dress said to her companion, "I didn't expect Ava's stepmother to be so formidable. She looks tough." Another girl sneered, "So what if she's tough? Our families are powerful enough that we don't have to suck up to her. Ava's enemy is our enemy. Don't you dare be nice to her." I scoffed. It was laughable. A bunch of wet behinthers kids trying to ostracize me. Your families may be prominent, but you're not calling the shots yet. By the time you are, you'll have put down deep roots in this city. I won't care who you are. You'll have to work with me. I couldn't be bothered to listen to their childish squabbles anymore. I fixed my hair and went back. When I returned to the party, Ava was already standing next to Alexander. Alexander looked at her with melting tenderness. "Today is our Ava's 18th birthday. I wish our Ava peace, safety, and happiness every day." He then picked up a crown from a velvet cushion and placed it on her head. It was an antique he had bought at an auction, worth a fortune. A girl in the crowd couldn't help but whisper to her companion, "It seems the Hawthorns still value Ava very much." Ava looked up and saw me, her gentle face full of provocation. I ignored it completely. Ava put on an innocent smile. "Mother, what are you planning to give me?" With Alexander's grand gesture. If I didn't give something valuable, I'd be criticized for being a cheap nouveau riche. And more valuable than an antique would be company shares. But a strange smile spread across my lips. I clapped my hands. The butler brought over an exquisite tray. I whipped off the red cloth. It was a simple letter. Ava opened it dismissively, but her eyes widened in shock and disbelief as she read the contents. I met her gaze with a smile, my voice gentle. Mother knows you're a good student with high standards for schools. So Mother asked Professor Samuel Reed to write you a letter of recommendation to the law school at the University of Munich. On your 18th birthday, Mother wishes you a bright future and a wonderful life of your own. At that, the look in Ava's eyes completely changed. Having grown up in a prestigious family, she was worldly. Although Alexander was important to her, right now, the offer was more important. Especially a personal letter of recommendation from Professor Samuel Reed, something Alexander couldn't get even if he begged. At that moment, Ava finally called me mother with genuine feeling. The smile on my face deepened with meaning. Go ahead. Study at the University of Munich's law school. You'll be so busy you won't make a peep. After all, the 3 years of undergraduate studies in Germany would be the most meaningful 7 years of her life. By the time she painstakingly graduated and returned, I guaranteed she'd be so spiritually cleansed that she wouldn't have the slightest interest in Alexander anymore. After all, even a smart person like me barely avoided repeating a year there. Someone like Ava, with a bit of cleverness but an inflated sense of self, was guaranteed to have a miserable time. The silly girl was still thanking me profusely. I, in turn, put on the air of a benevolent mother and graciously accepted her thanks. The party was filled with a happy atmosphere, with the exception of Alexander and the Hawthorne family, whose faces were stiff. I glanced at them but said nothing. I knew what they were up to. They had been dragging their feet on finding a school for Ava, wanting to keep her in the country. They wanted her here to antagonize me, to distract me with domestic drama while they used my dowry for their business activities, hoping I wouldn't notice. But what kind of person was I? I would never get bogged down in sentimental nonsense. A letter of recommendation that was impossible to refuse shut the Hawthorns up and dealt with the little pest Ava at the same time. After receiving the letter, Ava began to study the language. She didn't have much time, and German was not as simple as she had imagined. Even with her previous foundation, in-depth study was a struggle, not to mention her other subjects. I hired several hind tutors for her at great expense, who came to the Hawthorne mansion for non-stop lessons every day. Alexander watched from the side but couldn't find any fault. The moment he tried to get Ava to confront me, I would stop him with a smile. Darling, Ava is at a critical juncture right now. Since you love her, don't distract her at a time like this. I may not be very educated, but I know that knowledge is the most valuable thing. Ava enjoys this. Isn't that a good thing? I would smile at him, my eyes crinkling, and he would look away, flustered, especially the not very educated part. It made him squirm. He used to look down on me, not even bothering to learn about my background. It wasn't until I produced Samuel Reed's letter of recommendation at Ava's birthday party that he became wary. A graduate of the University of Munich's law school, with a double major in law and finance. During my master's studies, I met the founder of a luxury brand by chance, found my entrepreneurial direction, and decisively dropped out to create my own brand. At only 28, I had a vast fortune but kept a low profile, only entering the domestic market this year. And him, the self-proclaimed tycoon, had just coasted through a degree abroad on his family's coattails, only to return home and start playing house with a young girl. How could he compare to me? Knowing my background, Alexander's pride took a massive hit. He had been avoiding me for days. I, however, couldn't be bothered with him and focused on my own career. On Friday night, I had dinner with several suppliers at a private club. The ambience was pleasant, with a winding stream and a highly skilled zither player, whose southern tunes were melodious and captivating. After several rounds of negotiation, I managed to get what I wanted at the lowest price within their acceptable range. A pot-bellied middle-aged man sighed. Ms. Reed, doing business with you is truly a challenge. I smiled brightly and raised my glass to him. Mr. Wang, you flatter me. The feeling is mutual. After a few drinks, I excused myself to the restroom to catch my breath. The view from the rooftop was nice. I was just about to pull out a lighter when I heard a familiar voice. It was Alexander and the Hawthorne matriarch. I ducked behind a nearby curtain and listened. The old woman's usual benevolence was gone. Her voice low and icy. "Why haven't you made a move on Isabel Reed yet? Don't tell me you can't even handle one woman." Alexander's voice was full of frustration. "It's not that I don't want to. It's that Isabel is too vigilant. She's not a pushover. We can't just get our hands on that $1.5 billion. The old woman sneered. "She's just a woman. How capable can she be? Your sister-in-law was a tough nut to crack too. But didn't she spit out her entire dowry in the end?" The rooftop fell silent. The old woman continued slowly. "Since she's unwilling to give up the dowry, fine. Turn her into a vegetable. Won't her money be ours then? Just like we did to your sister-in-law. Don't tell me you can't even handle such a small matter." Hearing this, I froze, a sarcastic smile flashing in my eyes. So, the Hawthorne family was not a good one. After all, after the mother and son left, I was about to step out when I heard footsteps. The next second, a gentle voice spoke. "Ms. Reed, did you hear all of that?" I pulled back the curtain and looked up. A tall, slender man stood before me. A white shirt with a subtle pattern, a gray sweater, and the metal-framed glasses of a sophisticated villain. It was the professional manager of Hawthorne Group, and also the family's illegitimate son, Damien Hawthorne. This illegitimate son, who grew up in the slums until he was 15 and then entered the world of the rich to survive, had a surprisingly strong backbone. After struggling in the Hawthorne family for 3 years, he went to study in the United States at 18 and, upon his return, chose to remain loyal to Hawthorne Group. I twirled a lock of my hair and looked up at him lazily. "Mr. Hawthorne, you went to such great lengths for me to hear all that. What can I do for you?" Damien chuckled, not beating around the bush. He stated his ambition plainly. "I want the entire Hawthorne family. Work with me. When it's done, I'll give you 6% of Hawthorne Group shares, and I'll return your $1.5 billion with interest." I looked him up and down and then decisively shook his hand. Deal. The reason I could so easily cooperate with Damien was simple. His background played a large part. The foolish and lecherous old Mr. Hawthorne, the strong and sinister Hawthorne matriarch, Damien's mother who was taken by force, and then Damien, the illegitimate son. Moreover, Damien's position as a professional manager had long been a thorn in Alexander's side. If it weren't for the board's repeated objections, Alexander would have ousted him long ago. At this point, even if Damien wanted to stay out of the fray, he had to fight. And he was an ambitious man. After agreeing to cooperate with Damien, I didn't make any rash moves. I continued as usual, going to work every day. I would occasionally play the mother figure, showing concern for the exhausted Ava, and then use sharp words to humiliate Alexander. A man like Alexander was weak when you were strong, and strong when you were weak. Under my high-pressure tactics, he didn't dare to make a peep. It wasn't until I had established my branch in the city and began to take a large chunk of Hawthorne Group's profits as an investor that the Hawthorne matriarch could no longer wait. After I took my share of the money, she slammed the table. In front of a large group of shareholders, she pointed at Alexander's nose and shouted, "How did I raise such a useless son?" Then, with a dark face, she stormed out. When Damien recounted this to me, I roared with laughter. When I finished, Damien picked up his coffee cup and said, "But Ms. Reed, you need to be careful. Even the old woman is angry now, so it won't be long before they make a move on you." I scoffed. The Hawthorne family is in this pathetic state because of that old woman with a silver tongue and a heart of poison. So what if I take 40% of the profits? If it weren't for my investment, they wouldn't have a single penny right now. Damien nodded. The Hawthorns are used to taking advantage. That's just how they are. Be careful now. I have people around the old woman. When she makes a move on you, I'll warn you. After our discussion, we chatted a bit more about our cooperation and then went our separate ways. There are simple ways to make someone legitimately disappear from this world. Poison. A car accident. Poison comes in 2 forms, slow-acting or immediate. Since my return, I had been frequently in the public eye, so an immediate death would be too obvious. That left slow-acting poison. But in the current situation, I was like a sponge, madly absorbing water, expanding my territory every moment. Every day of delay meant another piece of Hawthorne's dominance in the city was eroded by me. A slow-acting poison was too slow. By the time I showed symptoms, Hawthorne Group would probably be the Reed Group. In comparison, a car accident was the most cost-effective way to get rid of me. Damien said that old hag was an expert at using car accidents to cover up her crimes. His own mother had lost her life in a car accident planned by the old woman. Today, although the matriarch was still powerful, he was no longer the same person. Damien assured me that as soon as he got news, he would inform me. After all, he and I were in the same boat now. The day of the plan arrived quickly. To burnish Ava's credentials, Alexander had built an art museum for her, exhibiting her oil paintings. The museum's construction had just been completed. As the owner, Alexander naturally had to attend the opening ceremony. I had always despised Alexander and refused to ride in the same car with him. This time was no exception. Ava had to study, so only Alexander and I were going. Just before we left, my secretary made an urgent call. The original supplier had suddenly jacked up the prices, and I needed to go to the company for negotiations immediately. After taking the call, I informed Alexander and told him to go on ahead. Although he had his complaints, he was too afraid of my wrath to say anything and left first. His usual car had just been found to have a minor system issue half an hour earlier. Thinking it was a hint from his mother, Alexander obediently switched to the car I usually used. 5 minutes after Alexander left, I randomly picked a car from the garage and went to my company. The supplier issue was real, but I was no fool. A problem I had anticipated was easily solved. An hour later, after resolving the supplier issue, I received a call from the police as I was leaving the meeting room. They said my husband, Alexander Hawthorne, had been in a serious car accident. His brains were splattered. They asked me to come to the hospital immediately. I immediately said I would be there as soon as possible and asked the doctors to do everything they could, regardless of the cost. By the time I arrived at the hospital, the Hawthorne matriarch was already waiting outside the operating room. When she saw me, the hatred in her eyes was almost tangible. "Isabel Reed, you bitch. Why did you harm my son?" She lunged at me, beating my chest. "He's the only son I have left. Why did you have to harm him?" My assistant, Mia, strong and sturdy, pushed her away, her face like frost. "Ma'am, we understand your anxiety when your son is in trouble, but don't you go slinging mud. Ms. Reed just rushed over from her company. How could she have had time to plot against your son? On the other hand, the road was so wide. Why did the truck driver have to hit the car Ms. Reed usually drives?" Mia, well trained by me, had a fierce look in her eye. The Hawthornes all looked away. "Guilty." Damien, standing to the side, stopped the old woman. "Mother, before the police have finished their investigation, perhaps you should focus on my brother. He shouldn't have said anything." Hearing Damien, the old woman turned on him, her eyes filled with malice. After a long moment, she slapped him across the face. The corridor fell silent. Damien didn't say a word. He gently touched his cheek with his long fingers. The old matriarch sneered. "Now that your brother is in trouble, you must be the happiest one, right? Let me tell you, if anything happens to Alexander, none of you will have it easy." She shook off the servants supporting her and strode away. Damien and I stood outside the operating room, speechless. The hospital corridor lights flickered, but in Damien's eyes, I saw something like a flame. This man was not as obedient and harmless as he appeared. Alexander had an older brother, but 3 years ago, he was shot and killed outside a casino in America while gambling. The Hawthorne matriarch was furious, hiring the best legal team to sue the casino owner, demanding the truth about her son's death. But the casino owner was backed by the local mafia, and the owner's younger brother was a famous local lawyer. With the two forces at a stalemate, and the incident happening in a foreign country, the case came to nothing. But if you dug deeper, you would find that the lawyer's same-sex partner was a close classmate of Damien's during his studies in America. Love cannot motivate, but hate can unleash powerful forces. Damien was a man raised on hatred. Like a venomous snake, he lay in wait for years, and then, when you least expected it, delivered a fatal blow. A person like that was not to be trifled with. Doctors are not gods. A man whose brains were splattered could not be saved. After more than 10 hours of emergency surgery, Alexander was pronounced dead. The Hawthorne matriarch almost fainted when she received the news. But only almost. Because the police had arrived. They brought the confession of the truck driver and came to arrest the suspect. The truck driver was no fool. The old woman had promised that if he killed me, she would pay the high medical bills for his daughter and mother's genetic diseases. But now he had messed up. He had killed the matriarch's darling, her only son. No one would protect him now. To get a lighter sentence, he quickly confessed everything. Based on his confession, the police immediately arrested the old woman. She tried to use her status to escape imprisonment. But the two young officers were not intimidated. Only then did she feel fear. Her aged voice, laced with terror, echoing through the hospital. Damien and I sat in the police station. After giving our statements, we were released. After this whole ordeal, I was exhausted. But Damien was still full of energy. He had finished his statement first and had somehow changed his clothes. He was now in a suit, a faint scent of cologne clinging to him. I turned to look at him. He pushed up his metal-framed glasses and smiled with impeccable style. "Ms. Reed, you should go home and rest. When you wake up, the shares and the $1.5 billion will be returned to you in full." Looking at him, I knew that after years of lying in wait, he was finally about to reclaim what was his. I wasn't interested in the Hawthorne family's messy affairs. Their internal structure was a chaotic mix of countless relatives. Trying to seize power in such a vast corporation was like trying to snatch meat from a pack of hungry wolves. I had only been with the Hawthorne family for half a year. The family was a swamp, and without full preparation, I wouldn't make a rash move. Besides, I still had a lot to do at my city branch. Now was not the best time to seize power. The shares and the $1.5 billion that the marriage law entitled me to were enough. The luxury car drove to the Hawthorne mansion. As I got out, I saw Ava waiting at the door, her face pale. Seeing me, she opened her mouth, hesitating. I walked up and patted her shoulder. "Alexander is dead." Ava nodded with difficulty, then looked up at me, all her previous arrogance gone. I let out a soft breath. "You still have to continue your studies. The requirements at the University of Munich's law school are exceptionally strict. Your current level is far from enough. Study hard." I looked down into her eyes. "As for the rest, Alexander didn't leave you anything, including shares, trusts, or property. Legally, you are not in an adoptive relationship. Alexander had no guardianship over you. You won't get a single penny from him." At my words, Ava's lips turned white, and she looked as if she might collapse. Alexander had kept Ava around to satisfy his Pygmalion fantasy, never really caring about her future. After all, she was meant to depend on him. Giving her too many assets would have been a bad thing for him. But looking at Ava's state, I sighed and turned to the lawyer waiting behind me. The female lawyer stepped forward, took Ava's hand, and handed her an agreement. Her voice was gentle as she explained. "As your stepmother, Ms. Reed will not leave you uncared for. This agreement stipulates that as long as you promise not to participate in Hawthorne Group's internal struggles in the future, and not to operate within the company under the identity of Alexander's adopted daughter, you will be entitled to the following assets: all your expenses for studying in Germany, $50 million in cash, and 2 properties in the city. You may also take all the luxury goods and jewelry that Alexander bought for you." Ava stood there, stunned. Then she looked up at me sharply. My expression was neutral. Spending a little money to ensure Ava never re-entered Hawthorne Group was worth it. She wasn't a threat now. But if someone with malicious intent used her name to operate within the company in the future, it would be a problem. But if Ava had ambitions and didn't sign the agreement, I had 1,000 ways to make her disappear from the Hawthorne world for good. After a long moment, Ava gripped my hand tightly and said urgently, "I'll sign. I'll sign. Give me the agreement. I'll sign it right now." Hearing her words, I smiled with satisfaction. The jewelry Alexander had bought her was worth more than $50 million alone, combined with the cash and property I was giving her. As long as she behaved, it was enough for her to live a life of comfort and luxury in the city forever. At the start of the school year, after seeing Ava off, I began to handle the shares and assets I inherited from Alexander. Although this business marriage was short, from a commercial perspective, I had profited greatly. Even though Damien held the majority of the shares, my holdings were enough to get me a seat on the board. On the day I went to Hawthorne Group, I met Damien. He was already looking dapper and stylish. He greeted me with a smile and invited me for a cup of coffee. I accepted. In the coffee shop downstairs from the company, Damien brought 2 freshly made coffees to my table. I took the coffee and smiled. I thought you would invite me somewhere more upscale. Damien smiled and shook his head. Sitting down and looking out the window, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a bright arc on his face. But in that light, I saw a hint of sadness. After a moment, Damien said, as if in a daze, "When I was a kid, I used to pass by here on my way to school. I would look through the window at the white-collar workers inside. I thought to myself, one day, I'll work here, make money, and support my mother. Later, I became the master of this place. But my mother was gone." Hearing him, I fell silent. A while ago, Damien had reopened his mother's case, demanding a retrial. He claimed his mother's death was not an accident, but a murder orchestrated by the Hawthorne matriarch. The chain of evidence he presented was complete and irrefutable. The old woman was charged with intentional homicide, among other crimes, with multiple offenses. The worst-case scenario was the death penalty, and the best wasn't much better. Prison was unavoidable. The matriarch had spent her life scheming, only to have her entire fortune fall into the hands of the illegitimate son. I wondered what she thought of that. When Damien came back to himself, he saw me across from him and smiled apologetically. "My apologies, Ms. Reed. I got lost in thought." I waved my hand, and he continued, "Ms. Reed, you've helped me so much this time. If you need anything in the city in the future, please don't hesitate to come to me." The internal struggles at Hawthorne Group haven't subsided, but fortunately, I have built up some connections during my time as a manager, so I can barely manage. For now, let's part ways here. With that, he stood up and bid me farewell. After he left, I looked out the window. The early autumn sun in the city was bright. The trees were lush and green, still full of life. I had been in the city for half a year. I had started a new company and joined the board of Hawthorne Group. My future was just beginning.